Alrighty, welcome back everybody to the second week of our web project development course, which I am hosting here at the Elk Grove Village Public Library. Last week we got a really good start on the material, learning about what is this course going to entail and this whole summer programs at the Elk Grove Library, and it was great meeting a bunch of new faces and familiar faces last week as well. This week we're going to dive into some more new concepts, reviewing some stuff from last week, and also making sure that we are in good standing to get started on our project, which we're going to be focusing on for these next 3 weeks. As always, it is great to see you guys back here today. Good to see some retaining names and faces from last week who are coming back. And I know that we also do have more people coming on in. We did have more people at the beginning as well, so we'll just let them on in as they are joining. Other than that, we'll get this show on the road. So thanks for coming on in, and let's get to the second week of this material. For those who do not know me, and I think everybody here knows me by now, but my name is Rayaan, Siddiqi, guys. I'm going to become now a sophomore at the University of Illinois Chicago, and I'm pursuing a degree in computer science. You guys might know me from a couple of things. One could be the programs which I've hosted over the past 2 to 3 years at the Schaumburg Library, or last summer at the Elk Grove Library, about technology programs from Tech Bites to the summer 2021 programs, where I love to focus and talk about and share my passion of technology and the world of computer science with you guys, and hopefully get you guys stimulated and more ready to hit the ground running when you guys, if and when you guys choose to go in such a field. You guys should be ready to go. Moreover, you might have heard about my book called The Switch Up, a book which is available to be purchased on Amazon. Go ahead, search it up, or go to my author website, author.rayaan.siddiqi.com, the link which is in the chat. The book is about a student's journey throughout the world of high school. And fun fact, next Tuesday, I'll be at the Schaumburg Library hosting an hour-long event talking about the book to a bunch of people. So if you are interested, sign up for that on the Schaumburg Library's events page on their website. Would love to see you guys there if you guys choose to come out. And yeah, if you guys know anything about me, you guys know that I love doing this stuff. Love teaching computer science, got a lot of passion. And hopefully, guys, if you guys want to learn more about that, you can follow me on my TikTok at Rayaan Siddiqi, where I talk much more about this stuff in depth, and would love to get you guys there as well. So let's talk about some things. And you guys know how I like to start off all of these courses and all of these programs. That is with, first of all, just getting some housekeeping stuff done, talking about our agenda. Then we're going to get to talking about the code concepts, which we introduced last week, getting more into talking about them, what they were, and then transitioning from there to our new coding concepts. We're going to see how we can pair what we learned last week with what we're going to be learning this week, and sort of building our foundation for this project, which we're going to be talking about today, and talking about the details and everything which it entails. Then after we got all that taken care of, then we'll get started coding. I'm assuming we'll have a good 20-25 minute chunk to get started coding, talking about what this project is, and making our way to creating this project, which we're going to be focusing on throughout these next 3 weeks. So without any further ado, let's get on started. Alrighty, so first things first, guys, I know that most of us here are already signed up, but first thing I want to make sure that all of us here is signed up for the Google Classroom. It is imperative, super important that you are signed up for the Google Classroom, because it is where I do all of our communication from last week. If we had people here, by show of hands, is where it was for the people who already joined the Google Classroom. Were they able to see the post I made last week about the recaps? Maha saying, yeah, with the YouTube links. Yep, exactly, yeah. So Maha, that's exactly right. So whatever happens in the Google Classroom is that after every week, I post a recap of what we accomplished that week. Now that recap entails the YouTube links, which are the recorded links to our videos, if you ever want to go back and reference some material, along with also the code links. So from last week, we did a brief introduction, like a 5-10 minute coding exercise, which I also posted a link to. So you can go ahead and check that out. So if you are not already signed up, I would highly recommend you sign up on the Google Classroom. You just need a Google account. You could use your personal or a parent's account and sign up with the code. Are you saying you got to sign in with my Google account first? Yep, exactly. So let me go ahead and actually preview the Google Classroom for you guys, so to make sure that we don't have any questions or any dangling questions or any barriers, so that everybody's able to join. So I'm going to share my screen right here. There we go. So here's how the Google Classroom looks like. I'm also going to post the link of the class invite if you want to join directly from the link. But like Ayush and how we're talking about, you guys just need a Google account to sign up. It's super simple. Put the code in and you're in our Google Classroom. So with the Google Classroom, guys, like I was talking about, you have access to all the posts which I'm making. Now, these are usually recap posts or reminder posts or a recap post, which I made last week. This recap post has all the information which we were talking about last week. This was what we did that day, the code link, which you can go to and see what we did last week, and also the recorded session links, which is super helpful because I've had people reach out saying that, hey, this didn't really make sense. How can I also go back and review it? Well, it's super simple. You can just pull up the coding link and then pull up the YouTube video link, and there you go. You can match what I was doing in the class last week with the coding link, and you should be well on your way. And moreover, it's a great way for us to have communication. People ask questions, and I'm able to respond to them. And overall, you know, it's a quick and easy way to stay in contact. So highly recommend that you are signed up. And as always, if you guys have any questions, any obstacles in your way, feel free to shoot me a message on the chat, an email, or post on the Google Classroom, and I'd love to help you out. Yeah. And the main thing is that it doesn't have to be today as well. It could be throughout the week. I'm always monitoring the Google Classroom. I usually like to get to it once or twice a day. And if that's the case, I will be sure to respond to any questions which you might have. Alrighty, so hopefully everybody is getting on, join in. Ayush and anybody else, if you have any issues with the Google Classroom, please do let me know. Ms. Tammy talking about that the Elk Grove Library also has 2 copies of my book. That is awesome to see. So as I was talking about, we can do a quick segue right here about my book. This is the book, The Switch Up, and the Elk Grove Library also has 2 copies, and a bunch of libraries across the state of Illinois have the copy of the book. So if the Schaumburg Library is closer to you, the Hanover Park Library, the Hoffman Estates, Roselle, Rolling Meadows, all the libraries, very thankfully, all the libraries house the book. Or if you'd like to get your personal copy, you can get it at on Amazon.com. It's for $10, and I think it's really worth the read, especially in the age range which you guys are in. As you guys are getting set up to go into high school, to start off more thinking about what you guys want to do with your careers. And as I was talking about, also the Schaumburg Library has. I'm going to be doing an author talk next week at the Schaumburg Library, where you can go sign up. I'll drop the link to that as well in the chat. Here it is, on July 19th at 6 p.m. So if you want to sign up for that, we'd love to see you guys there as well. So let's get on back to our material for the day. The second thing is, guys, another thing linked in the Google Classroom, that being our last year sessions. Last year, we did a bunch more sessions, and last year's summer programs were focused on a different computer science programming language, which was the programming language of Python. It was not web development, but indeed it was Python, which was a text-based programming language. So if you guys are interested in learning more about that, it's super simple. Just go back to the Google Classroom, go to the classwork page, go to the summer 2022 Intro to Web Development, and there is the link. Last year recorded sessions, I click that, click the link, and it'll take me to the playlist of all of our programs from last summer. And you guys can take a look at those and learn much, much more about those as well. If you guys want to wander off into some other things, which we did, like MIT App Inventor, we did Python sessions, we did algorithmic programming, a bunch of more cool stuff, which I highly recommend you want to check out. Alrighty. So that is a quick little housekeeping items, which I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page for. But now let's get started with the coding material. So we're going to get started off with a brief recap of what we accomplished last week. That being, we learned 2 important coding concepts last week. And I want to see how we're doing with those as we start to build up on more of our building blocks for this week as well. So first things first, we talked about something called variables. Variables. These were the first coding concept which we hit upon last week. Now, without me having to recap in what they were, can anybody remind the class, what are these variables and what are they used for? Anybody in the chat? And as always, feel free to unmute. And guys, one of the biggest things is unmute and, do not be afraid to be wrong. Being wrong is being right, because at the end of the day, if you're never wrong, you can never really be right. Something to think about, right? So I used the chat saying it's a symbol that can be used to identify a term. Bing, bing, bing. 100% correct, Ayush. Now, Ayush is talking about how we use it as an example, like it was used in algebra. Exactly, right? So we talked about how variables in a way can be used to store terms, and that could be algebraic terms. So like storing numbers. Can anybody remember what things, what's the main purpose of variables? Maha saying to hold data. Exactly. That is 100% correct. So variables are a great thing to hold data. And Ayush agreeing. Let's see that communication, guys. So variables are a great way for us to hold data, storing data. And that could be something like algebraic data, which would be numbers. Anybody remember what other forms of data can variables hold? Maha saying words like our names. Exactly. So those are called strings. And on the other hand, Ayush was talking about integers, right? Like numeric data. On the other hand, we got strings, which are words. And also we have a bunch of other different data types, which are like Booleans and arrays, stuff like that, which we'll talk about more in coming weeks. Ayush talking, okay, jump in the boat. Ayush, jump in the ship a little bit right there, talking about actions and conveyance. How about you hold that thought as we get into the next concept? But yes, you guys hit the nail on the head. Variables are a way for us to store data. They're a container for us to store values. That could be algebraic data, whether it's integers, it could be strings and Booleans. And like we were talking about earlier today, they're able to store different types of data. Like here, we got an example of a variable storing a number. Now, we also talked about how it's sort of nice that we can read our lines of code in English. I don't really remember, somebody last week was doing a great job of reading these verbatim as to how does code relate to English. So this first line of code, right, it's saying the variable x is now going to hold the value of 5. Who can tell me, what does the second line say? Feel free to unmute.
Y is equivalent to 6.
Exactly, Ayush. Yep, so it was Ayush last week who was doing a great job. And Ayush, great seeing you continue and carry the torch on forward. So the variable y is now going to hold the value of 6. And then the last line is saying the variable z is going to hold the sum of x and y, which is simply saying variable z is equal to x plus y. And for those of us who are joining in, nice to see you guys coming on in. We're just doing a brief recap of what we accomplished last week. And we also did a brief recap of the Google Classroom. So please make sure that you are already signed up in the Google Classroom, guys, if you're coming on in right now. If not, the link is in the chat. I've put it in again, and be sure to join on in. Alrighty, so that was the first coding concept, which we talked about last week. Yet there was one more thing which we touched upon. That was this HTML component called a button. Now, what was the purpose of our button in this sense of computer programming? And you remember? I know Ayush was talking about it earlier. Ayush, you want to further clarify? Yes, Ayush saying it was to tell us our name. Yep, Ayush. So, and Maha, yep, saying it's like an action to do something. So combining both of your guys' ideas, Maha and Ayush, it's basically exactly like that, right? It's an action for something to happen. Now, how does that happen? So when I click a button, something's supposed to happen, and that is where the action is supposed to occur. Are you saying the button executes the action? Bing, bing, bing. Exactly, right? So think of the buttons, guys, as an action call. When you click them, there's an expected event which is supposed to happen. And in the last week's example, guys, we had that whenever we click the button, it would alert or tell us what our name was, which in our name was stored in a variable, right, as a string. And now if you're interested in checking out where can I find that coding link, guys, it is in the Google Classroom. In our week 1 recap, I open that up and there is the code link. If I click that, it'll take me to what we were coding last week. And as a quick example right here, oh, it looks like it did not save and the link is otherwise. So that is a bit of an issue. I'll get that fixed up, no worries. But what happened was that last week when we clicked the button, it would alert us our name. So great job of relating that to last week's stuff, guys. So, and as we're gonna now start to get into our new coding concepts for the day, it's important that we remember how we're gonna remember these, right? And the main thing is always relating what we're learning in this computer science world to a real life concept. So for instance, our variables we talked about last week are related to what real life concept, guys? What did we talk about? Yep, so exactly. A box is a variable, right? Because it holds data. And a button is sort of like an action call. When you click it, something happens. Now, today, we're going to dive deeper into 2 new coding concepts. So building our foundation more and more. And the first thing which we're going to talk about today is functions. Now, last week, we did get a little bit of a teaser as to what a function is. What are these functions? Before I talk about what they are, anybody want to take a shot in the dark as to what is a function? And feel free to unmute, guys. Yusuf, Rachid, Ayush, Mahab. And do not be afraid to be wrong, guys. A function, we talked about briefly last week, if you remember anything of that. Anybody have any ideas, guesses? So you're saying it's like a big storage type thing, right? For a lot of code. Okay, getting on the right path. Exactly. Anybody else want to build upon that?
Can reduce the lines of code we type, just like condensing a strip of code.
Yes, 100% agree. So that's one of the benefits of using a function. So before I talk about the benefits, let's talk about what the function is. And a function is exactly like you guys were talking about, right? It's a way for us to hold a lot of code. Now, essentially, functions are like a house, guys. Another analogy to remember, functions are like a house in the sense that they hold a bunch of different operations going on in the house, whether it's the bedrooms, the bathrooms, the basement, the attic. It's all held within this large exterior, right, which is the house. And similarly, in code, functions are used to hold all of our logic in all of our code. And like Ayush was talking about right there, guys, functions are a great way for us to reduce the number of lines of code we have, while also making sure that our logic is all in one place. Essentially, a function is supposed to have one purpose, and each function has a different purpose in our code. Yep. And like a function, guys, like we talked about, it's like a house. It wouldn't really make sense for us to have a bunch of different bedrooms and a bunch of different bathrooms all scattered across Illinois, right? That would be pretty weird, seeing just one bedroom on the street, across the streets, right? That'd be pretty weird. Instead, what we have is a house, right? Which stores all these different things. And similarly, a function has that exact same purpose, but instead of bedrooms and bathrooms, it's for different lines of code. So let's see the real example of what are functions in code. And like we just talked about, the purpose is to hold all of our code. And more specifically, we used a function last week in our coding example because it will be something which will be called when we click a button. So when we click a button, there's something which is supposed to happen, right? Like an action call. What is the action which happens when we click a button? Well, in this case, when we click a button, we want a function to be called. And that function could be anything which we like. And last week, it was a function which would alert us our name. Now, as you guys can see right here, this is how the function code works. All we do is simply type the word function, then the name of the function, then the open and closed parentheses. Now, do not worry about what are these things called parameters, because that's something which we'll get to next week. But we have parameters. And then we have all of this code. The function body is what it's called, with all of our main logic in our coding statements. Now, when we're talking about functions, it's really important to make sure that when we're naming our functions and naming our variables, we name them accurately because we want all of our stuff to be helpful. When I'm working on a project, right, I don't want to name a function Gooliga, like something random, right? Because that wouldn't be helpful. I want to name it something which helps out. So for instance, last week in our example, when we were doing a function which was printing and alerting us our names, what would be a good name to name that function?
Something regarding name, so like you can tell that it's relating to that function.
Yep, exactly, Ayush. So talking about some way for us to know what is going on in that function. Maha saying like alert names. Exactly, that's a great function name. It's specific and it's telling us what is that function's purpose. And this is something which is super important, guys, because the earlier you develop this mentality, the skill, the easier your future coding lives will be. Because when you're working with other people, for instance, right, you want to make sure that your code is easy to read and easy to dissect in a way for others to read. And the more specific and better documented your code is, the more easier it is to work with teams and make sure that your impact is much larger. So that is the first coding concept of our today, the new coding concept for the day, that being a function used to hold all of our code. Think about it like a house. Alrighty. So now we're going to get into our second and new coding concept for the day, that being a conditional. Conditionals. Conditionals. Well, before I talk about anything or any analogy, anybody want to take a shot in the dark? What do they think is a conditional?
I think a conditional is maybe if only one case scenario occurs, that function would only be activated if that scenario occurs.
I love it. Ayush. That's 100% on the right path. A conditional is sort of like if a condition is met, something happens. Conditionals, condition, maybe something related. Anybody else want to share? Maha, Rashid, Yusuf? Maha's saying condition something. Yeah. So this idea of like a word within the word, right? Is a conditional something to do with if the condition is going on? What's going on right there? Well, I think it'll make much more clear sense so when we look at a real world example. And let's look right here. A conditional is sort of like performing a task only when a certain condition is met in our code. Now, in this example right here, guys, we got a stoplight. So when we're driving a car, right, I don't think any of us here have our permits, right? Anybody have a permit right here? Buddy, just out of curiosity? Permit? I don't think, right? Because, oh, Ayush got his permit. Okay. Oh, no. Okay. All right. I was about to say, wow, it's pretty cool. So yeah, Ayush saying like a thing which will run if a condition is met. Exactly. So let's talk about a real world example right here. A stoplight. Now, if the light is red, what does a car do? What are you supposed to do? Stop. Exactly, right, Maha? Halt the car. Love it. You're supposed to stop the car. If the light is green, what are you supposed to do? Exactly. Supposed to go. And if it's yellow, you got to make an effort to stop. But if not, you're supposed to just go and drift through the light. So I just talked about a couple of English sentences right there. But in reality, what we were doing was conditionals in the sense that if the light is red, car is supposed to stop. If the light is green, the car is supposed to go. If the light is yellow, the driver should look at his options. Is it possible for me to pull it through or should I stop? What I just did right there was use conditionals in real life. And it's something, guys, which we utilize in a bunch of different times throughout the day and you might not even realize it. So like say, if the weather outside is blazing hot, if it's 100 degrees plus, then I should stay inside the house. Else, if the weather is, say, the 70s or 80s, it's a great day to go outside and play. Then I'm going to go outside. What I'm doing right there is doing conditionals. I'm talking about if a condition is met, then I'm going to do a certain action. Otherwise, if that condition is not met, then I'm going to do a different action. Anybody want to take another example? Can they provide an example? It's always great to sort of relate the material to a real world example. So that's, a real example right there with the stoplight. Anybody else want to share anything? I'm sure you guys don't even realize it, right? We use conditionals every day in real life. Oh, yeah, if the gas is full, yeah. Oh, that's a good example. So in a car, if the gas is full, then we keep driving. Else, aka otherwise, we have to fill up the car with gas, which is a pretty big thing nowadays with the gas prices, right? Well, that's true. So let's take a look at what does this mean in a coding sense. Conditionals, guys, are exactly like how I was talking about. If a condition is met, then we execute a certain piece of code in JavaScript. Otherwise, if that condition is not met, we could check for a different condition, aka an else if. If that condition is met, then we do a different piece of code. Otherwise, if none of those conditions are met, then we will execute that other piece of code. So we're sort of seeing how what I was just talking about in English is sort of directly related to code in the sense that if a condition is met, then we execute a certain piece of code. Otherwise, if that condition is not met, then we execute a different piece of code. And in this sense, what we could think about is if the first condition could be if the light is green, then I go. So the go would be in this bracket in this first condition. Otherwise, if the light is red, then I stop. So it's sort of relating how it's exactly how you think about it. Conditionals are if-else statements. Their task is to execute a piece of code if a certain condition is met. Alrighty, guys. So at this point, anybody have any questions on any of the 4 concepts which we've learned? Those 4 concepts are now variables, the buttons in HTML, functions, and conditionals. Any questions, any ideas, thoughts you want to share? Anything you want to ask? Aisha, has anything? Anybody else? Rachi, Yusuf, Maha? It's all clear to go. So if all clear to go, how about we proceed, right? Alrighty. And at this point, guys, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to pause the meeting and I'm just going to restart it up. All right. So I'm going to have you guys rejoin and I'll see you guys in a minute. All right.